If you believe you're on a round ball spinning in outer space, stop scrolling. This video is for you. Now remember, the only reason you believe you're in outer space is because someone you respect told you you were. Other than this, you have no proof, and you are about to see that that isn't proof at all.
Any experiment today can prove that the globe doesn't exist. It's impossible.
But then, how can we determine the real shape of the planet? The CTZ researchers collected information on the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars in different parts of the planet. In this research, which lasted several years, images were recorded by cameras installed in all these places during the day and at night.
We found several differences in the trajectory of the sun. One of the most significant was between Australia and Argentina, which are in the same tropic.
While in Argentina, the sun moves at about 180 degrees. In Australia, it moves almost 270 degrees, which would be impossible in a spherical Earth model. Another significant example was in the Canary Islands, where a time-lapse of the stars showed a circular movement incompatible with the spherical model of the Earth.
This movement would only be justified if the place were near the poles in a spherical Earth, which is not the case.
We do not understand that with so many discrepancies we have found, and with the technology available today, no researcher, no scientist, no astronomer, no space agency in the world has perceived any of this.
The discrepancy in the comparison of the trajectory of the sun and the stars between the different points, when related to its geographical position in the current world map, allowed to generate a new geographical model of the continents. In this model, the continents present a size and position somewhat different from the current world map, having the North Pole to the center and the other continents around it.
Okay, so here at the top, we have a map that was generated by the researchers at the Ziggurat Technology Center in Argentina. And at the bottom, we have a map, an ancient Chinese map from 10 centuries ago. You see the striking resemblance? Extraterrestrials are not coming from a place called outer space. They are coming from the extra terrains that you see here that are outside of the border that surrounds us that we know as Antarctica. This is the reason no one can go and explore Antarctica, because you will find out that we are not on a round ball in outer space.
Whoa, buddy. Isn't that interesting? Well, how are you guys? How are you doing today? David Vose here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Well, friends and family and those who've just popped in and all you flat earthers. And I'm not, necessarily against the idea that the earth is not necessarily a globe, as you guys might know. But this is going to be an interesting video, friends. The map that this man speaks of, more cavalier, as though it's just known that this map is real and it's true. And this is a map that was made 10 centuries ago. And it's a real map. And it needs to be taken seriously. And this is more evidence that the earth really is flat. And beyond that, more than the earth is flat, there might be other continents beyond the ice wall. Wow, this is interesting. It is compelling and amazing information. But I want to ask and get down to the bottom of some questions that this brings us to, that nobody ever seems to ask. Is this map real? And what does it mean if it is? And is there any other evidence for this? And we're going to go into this in a way that I don't think has been done, and this is important that we do it this way. And so, you flat earthers, if you're sincere and you want to know the real truth, I challenge you to listen to this carefully, ponder it prayerfully, and at the same time, I encourage those who believe the earth is a globe and believes everything NASA says, please watch this video and consider the facts that I will put herein today. You'll be surprised, both sides will be surprised at the information that's going to be in this video. So, as usual, we'll start off with asking AI some questions and see what we can come up with, friends. So, I asked AI, is the map 10 centuries ago? Let's see. By Chinese real? And they say the question refers to the Da Ming Huni II, a map created by the Ming Dynasty in 1389, which some scholars believe is a source map for a later, more well-known map of the same name. The 1389 map is considered authentic, and while the Da Ming Huni II itself may be a later copy, the Ming Dynasty undoubtedly created a map around that time. The map, which includes both land and sea routes, was kept in the Imperial Palace and is now housed in Beijing. More details, authenticity of the 1389 map. While some scholars suggest the Da Ming Huni II is a later rendition, the 1389 map itself is considered genuine. The purpose of the map was created after the Ming Dynasty's Hongwu Emperor ousted the Mongol Yuan Dynasty. Now, take note of the fact that the Mongol Dynasty was a Yuan, which is their way of saying John, Prester John, remember him? Who, it appears from all the records that I'm looking at and all the things that I'm digging up, that Prester John ruled all the way to Japan for like remember, Israel was taken into captivity 700 BC. And from that point forward, they went into all the nations. Some of them went over the Caucasus Mountains. Some of them went all the way across Afghanistan, Persia, and over into China and the Mongol Empire. And while we have Genghis Khan, which means King of Kings, there certainly were there's letters written from Prester John from over there. There is documented evidence that there was a Juan or a John that ruled along with a King of Kings, who became King of Kings after he defeated John the Presbyter. And John the Presbyter then moved, and remember, this could be a knight in the tradition of Prester John. In other words, the knights were knighted and one after the other, and they were always called John or something. We don't know, because there seems to be centuries of this. And Prester John writes a letter when he gets to Ethiopia, and then eventually goes to America and around Carolina in that area. But that's just a side point. Emperor ousted the Mongol Yuan dynasty. If there was a map, it may have been made by the Israelites. And, well, I remember Prester John didn't happen until the days of Christ, and Israel was in captivity from 700 BC. So obviously there was no Prester John before about 100 AD. But it seems that Prester John went somewhere and took Mary, and they recognized him as this individual that, we've lost a lot of these records. I believe that there were many religions in the world that they knew they were the true religions, the true temples. All temples in the world seem to teach the same astrological information. And so they all traced it all back to Enoch, which in every nation they had their own word for him, Thoth or whoever, or Hermes. And you want to know a little secret, guys? They know it too. We know it now because we're discovering it ourselves. But they've known it and they've hidden it from us. If they didn't know it, then why did they build an Athenian temple for Washington, D.C., or the Vatican or whatever, and claim it's Christian? If they're really going to teach the Judean laws and believe in this royal bloodline, which Charlemagne married into from Jeconiah that were the popes. Yeah, all the popes were Jews. If they knew that and today these same people trying to build another temple, they already got temples all over the world. But what they're trying to do is start animal sacrifices back up again. They want the Jewish temple. But they certainly know that the temple at Athens, Egypt, Rome, and all these places were real, legitimate temples. And they know the connection between the Jewish temple and the temple at Athens or Baalbek or whatever, because as we saw the other day, the Jewish temple is in the shape of a person, but not a male, but a female. It's a female person with the doors being the vagina, as we saw the other day, and the hinges being the hymen. Well, as crazy as that sounds, that's exactly what we've got there in Washington. The Washington Monument is the male phallic symbol, but it's not the temple. The temple is the Capitol building, which is the bin, which is the female anatomy. And so somewhere in Jerusalem, there is a male part, but it's not on the temple proper. So they understand that there are two priesthoods, male and female. And the female line went through Miriam, not Moses. And that went down to the Nazarite line and the Melchizedek priesthood, which went with the temple at Bethel, or the house of El. And that went into all the world and became Buddhism and Shintoism and Zoroastrianism and Confucianism and everything else, and the Taoism and so forth all over the world. And those temples are legitimate, but they need to bring it all back into harmony. They need to begin animal sacrifices and the Judean temple, to go back to the law of Moses, to go back to an old age before Aries, back to the time when Saturn ruled, or Apollyon, according to the Greeks, to the Aquarian age. This is why they have songs. The age of Aquarius. You see, we're not going into the Aquarian age. That's backwards. We're going forwards. The night is far spent. The day is at hand. The summer, the day, Uranus' kingdom on the top of the wheel, which is the heavenly kingdom, not the kingdom of darkness ruled over by Saturn. And they've lied to people and made up this idea that we're going back into the Aquarian age, but we're going to the age of Taurus because the age of Aries is just about over. So this is one of their big lies. The goat, the beast. So they're very much aware, and they understood the lineal descent of this royal bloodline, and they accepted John, and they knew about Christ. Remember, Thomas went over there and preached the gospel to him. He didn't preach to people who knew nothing about the gospel. It was written in the stars. But what he was doing, just like with the Jews and the Greeks, was telling them that the one that the stars prophesied had come, and it was Jesus. And so John was the guy who baptized Jesus. So John was the guy that is in our Bible, John the Baptist, and was in the tradition of Elijah. And Elijah was the one who made the school of the prophets, and that was the one who made all the prophets who went into all the world and taught them the gospel. So you've got Buddhism and Shintoism and Zoroastrianism and everything all around the world, which is the religion of the prophets. I'm just throwing that in there as we read, but it says, it's speculated that the map celebrated this historic event. I believe they had the map. That's why, remember, Joseph of Arimathea was going all over the world. He had tin mines and gold mines and silver mines all over the world. And there is records that show that Jesus actually went with Joseph of Arimathea on these, because remember, there are 13 years that we don't know where Jesus went, and he went to India. So how did he get there? He may have also went to America and different places. There certainly went to Glastonbury, England, and up and around Europe. So how did he go there? And this was done with Joseph of Arimathea's boats. Well, who is this? Well, the Ptolemies had boats. And the line of the Ptolemies seems to be mingled with all of this too. But there were ancient nations who had boats. It wasn't just a private guy. This was a royal or an elite individual, Joseph of Arimathea. And so was John. They understood him as the reigning prince. And of course, he handed that title to Jesus. Later it went to James and so forth. But I think they may have had these maps since 700 AD and went all around the world, because the Bible is all about the dispersion of Israel and where they went. And they went on boats. And Dan is known for going everywhere on his boats and naming a lot of things after himself. This is why the northern tribes of Israel took on the name of Dan. And we've got Swedan and Lundan and the Danube and the Danister and all of these Dins and Dans up there. And where he started from Sidon by Tyre and mated with, because there was a descendant of Dan whose name was Samson, who married Delilah, which is the high priestess of the Phoenicians. And Samson was of the line of Dan and of the line of Judah, so he was a royal blood. And he was also prophesied very clearly in Moses and certain prophecies, where they specifically single out Judah, Joseph, and Dan as significant individuals that would lead Israel. It says, Dan shall lead his people and judge his people. So the map includes both land and sea routes, and it may have included information on Mongolia and Southeast Asia. Later copies, a full-size digital replica of the map, was created in 2002 for a South African government. Current location, the original map, is kept protective storage at the First Historical Archive of China in Beijing. In conclusion, the Da Ming Huni II is a real map created by the Ming Dynasty around 1389, and it is considered an important historical document. Well, there's a crude image of the map, but we can't tell what it looks like. I don't know. I guess it's very old. So let us see if we can find this map that's been digitally recreated and we can see it clear, and what does it really look like. But here's the thing. I kind of spoofed you there. And so you can take this as an example that people are going to spoof you. They're going to go on and on and on and talk about something that isn't even related to what you think they're supposed to be talking about. Because we just sat there and talked about this map that was from 1389, Da Ming Huni II. But did you notice the discrepancy? The guy was talking about a map that was 10 centuries ago. That's not 10 centuries. That's only, 700 years. So, it seems like AI is being disingenuous. However, maybe AI just didn't know what I was talking about. Although you'd think, a lot of times they do seem to act like they know what they're talking about. They know what you mean, right? But in this case, I'm asking them about a map 10 centuries that had to do with the flat Earth, and they come up with this map, and that's not the same map. It's almost as if they were trying to avoid the question about the map I was actually talking about, which is the one that was 10 centuries ago, not 700 years ago. And a map that shows literally all these other continents in the flat Earth, concept. Well, it took me a while to even get them to acknowledge anything about this. Like, what is it I'm talking about? What are they? It's like either they didn't know. Well, they did know. They ended up coughing it up after I, went over there and, smacked them around a little bit. They coughed it up. But it's like they didn't want to. And that seemed suspicious to me right off the bat. But I kept digging. And I found the actual map that was 10 centuries ago. And yeah, I got to get a load of this. So I thought, okay, is there really a map that looks like that with all these other continents around the perimeter, and other lands beyond the Arctic. Because you hear about all this stuff and nobody ever tells you or gives you the facts as to whether or not this map is real. But they state that it is. The flat earthers will say, oh, this map was made 10 centuries ago, and this proves the earth was flat, and they've got, and they just move on. This is disingenuous, and friends, we've got to stop this disingenuous stuff going around on the internet and getting people just all hyped up. We have to stop listening to stuff, or if we think something is interesting and it might be real, look it up and find out if it's real. So there is a 1907 Hawaiian Gazette. It says, I looked this up here. I spent a lot of time when I looked on AI and I asked about a 10th century old map that the flat earthers use. They never mentioned this map. I guess because they say they don't think it's real. But it's just not even mentioned. I couldn't find it. I thought, well, I'm about to give up. I did find another map that I'll show you that might give some credence to this kind of a thing, but not really. But I was almost exhausted and couldn't find it. And then I wrote something proper. Well, I found out where the map came from and who it was attributed to and so forth. And then I asked AI, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's probably not real. It says the map attributed to Dr. Kobayashi, a Japanese surgeon, that was featured in the Hawaiian Gazette in 1907, is likely not a real historical accurate map. Here's why. No credible evidence, there's no independent verification or historical evidence to support the existence of this supposedly ancient Tibetan map. Flat Earth theory. The map was used by Dr. Kobayashi's brother to promote the idea of a flat Earth, which is scientifically inaccurate and not supported by the evidence. Poem's interpretation. A poem written in response to the map suggests it was more of a dream or a symbolic representation of the world rather than an actual historical document, according to ResearchGate. In summary, while the story of Dr. Kobayashi and his brother and his discovery of an ancient Tibetan map is interesting, there is no evidence to suggest that the map is real, historically accurate representation of the world. And by the way, look at the bottom. AI mode is experimental and can make mistakes. I'm supposed to be the first person that they're allowing to use this as an experimental thing. But I don't know why they're trying to say it makes mistakes. I mean, are they saying it doesn't know everything? Well, then how is it going to take over the world and run the world? I mean, that's kind of crazy. But so here's a representation of this map. And if you think about it, it's a really very crude map. I mean, there's no cities or towns or anything. It's just more or less looks like somebody penciled in something, But flat earthers are just going wild with this, and you see it everywhere. But it says in January of 1907, an apparently ancient Tibetan map of the world featured in the Hawaiian Gazette. It was put forward by Dr. Kobayashi, a Japanese surgeon whose brother discovered the map in the nearby mountains. The poem is a response to that map. Figure 1 and its advocates. Here's the poem. Dr. Kobayashi's brother had lost his human heart on a mountaintop one night, contemplating the vast and empty sky. He spent the rest of his days mapping the heavens in search of it, but without his human heart, his eyes were clear at last, and in the skies he saw the world as it were, strewn about. He cast his eyes to the mud and brine of the birth, and like groaning desert dunes, the world spat itself out, sucked itself back in, and breathed with oceanic grace. Is this the whole of the world then? A foamy soap spatter drifting on a wave coming together as it inhales, scattering apart its exhales only to speed back together? Isn't that what the Buddha meant? All composite things are perishable. That blitzed up sketch of the world is one half of the sky, one half of the world, bound ceaselessly. That shattered leopard spot world just above the exposure is one half true and one half Kobayashi's dream. So that was a poem. But guys, wait till you see this. So I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere. This is a poem. It's just a made up thing. But there's more deception. Those trying to say that this poem proves that it's a dream and not a reality are also lying, because the poem wasn't written until 2018. The poem doctor, see, I had to dig deep, because you find the poem and you say, oh, okay. And AI and everybody just says, oh, it was written about it in response to it, and therefore we must assume that it's a dream. However, the poem, Dr. Kobayashi's Dream, is a relatively recent work published in 2018 and written by Charika Swanepoel. The poem is in a response to an event that occurred in January of 1907, when a Japanese surgeon named Dr. Kobayashi presented an apparently ancient Tibetan map of the world in the Hawaiian Gazette. The map was supposedly discovered by Dr. Kobayashi's brother in the nearby mountains. Essentially, the poem is not from 1907, but a modern response written by, so who cares about this poem? It means nothing. We've got to go back and decide whether or not this map that this Kobayashi brought over from a Buddhist temple was real, or whether that was a scam. So I endeavored to see if I could find any more evidence. So I asked AI, is there any evidence that the map discovered by Kobayashi is real? And it says, no, there is no credible evidence to support that the map discovered by Dr. Kobayashi's brother, purportedly found in Tibet and believed to be centuries old, is a real or authentic historical artifact. Here's why. Fictional context. The map's origin story and its connection to a flat earth theory strongly indicate that it's a work of fiction rather than a genuine historical map. Spread within the flat earth communities, the map and the related tale have gained traction within flat earth communities, suggesting that it's being used as evidence for a discredited belief, not a legitimate historical discovery. The lack of supporting evidence. There is no independent verification or scholarly acceptance of the map's authenticity. No reputable historians, cartographers, or scientific institutions have validated its age or origin. Similarities to other forgeries. There are historical examples of maps forgeries that have fooled experts for a time, but they were later exposed as fraudulent. In summary, the Kobayashi map, its associated story, appear to be fictional and lack the necessary evidence to be considered a genuine historical artifact. You see, I see this going on all the time, and I know that people have good hearts and they're trying, and they believe, maybe they believe it and they didn't look into it and find out. I mean, this is the problem. You want to believe something so bad that you just believe it and you don't look it up, you don't dig deep. So I see the same thing going on with, for instance, the Gospel of the Essenes, the Hebrew Gospel of Essenes or something. And people are like, oh, look at this, the real gospel, we found it. It's all about vegetarianism and all of these things, And if you just do a little research, just look it up, you'll see that it's a forgery. It's not real. It's not an ancient manuscript. It doesn't mean that some of the things that it teaches isn't true. It's a beautiful book, but it's a novel. It's not an ancient scripture. And so if we're going to get to the bottom of anything, we're going to have to stick to the facts. I'm not saying that I know what shape the earth is. I do think there may be credible evidence to show that it's not necessarily the size or the shape that we have been told. I think it's got to be a lot bigger, because, or at least flatter, because you can see further than they say you can. And there's a lot of anomalies that you might look at and say, well, maybe it's not a globe the size that they say it is. Maybe there are worlds beyond the Arctic, but if there are, I believe they're probably in another dimension, kind of like more like a holographic. I think of it in the sense of you go to the North Pole or the South Pole, and maybe you go through a wormhole. Now, maybe it is a big flat eternal plane, but we can only see so far. Our consciousness can only think so far. So what we believe is over that mountain, we can't see. So it doesn't exist for us. And so the human race, we are conscious of this that we're conscious of. Perhaps they've kept us in the dark so that we aren't conscious of it. And or maybe we're just in a hologram being controlled to only perceive what we perceive. Maybe there is some kind of a digital wall. Maybe it is something like that. But I guarantee this universe wasn't made like a computer program. That's not what it is either. Because imagine then that if this is a computer program that we're in, who made the computer program? You say, yeah, but that's the same thing you've got with the creator making the world. Who made the creator? Well, no, we don't have that problem there, because what we're saying is that mind and the and being is infinite. It doesn't need a creator, but it manifests thoughts that do change, and so we manifest an image thoughts, and that's the world we live in. But those images change, and they're not the endless, unchanging reality. And perhaps the way our mind works, since we can only see what we can see, we don't see beyond the other side of the mountain, perhaps our minds create a world around us, like when we're in a dream. There seems to be no difference between the reality that we are in our dream and the reality that we're in here. I mean, it looks perfectly real, but when we go to sleep, then we're in some other world. Although that world does seem more fleeting. Well, when we're awake, it does. But when we're not awake and we're in our dream, it seems very real. And by the way, I have an experience I want to share with you one day. I don't think I'll do it today, but I had a unique experience last night with some dreams. But I'll share that with you. It does kind of give some insight into what dreams really are and stuff when you really examine dreams. And sometimes that's hard to do, to examine dreams, because people, when they wake up, they forget their dreams. But so it's a technique you've got to learn. But we've got to stop just saying, oh, we know that the earth is flat. We don't know that any more than, like somebody said the other day, if you don't want to believe these scientists because we know they're lying, why would you believe some kid in his basement to come up with a theory that the earth is flat? And we don't have any credible evidence that it's flat. We only have credible evidence that we don't know what shape the earth is. We have credible evidence, but it's difficult to understand, but it's scriptural evidence that we're in a world that we, the Elohim, manifest with the word and faith and the mind. Now, it's interesting because the way that some prophets have described the world being created, even the ancient Eastern texts, which are difficult to read because they're not in our language, and it's so vast, and nobody's made a concordance on these kinds of things like they did with the Bible. I mean, I wish somebody would. I wish we could start studying, but it would be so deep and so much. It's out of my peripheral. I've got to study what I know. And I do try, if I've got time, to go into other things. But I'll admit, I haven't studied the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, which I want to get to. But I do know that I can get a lot of information about what they say and mean from people like Helena Blavatsky, who did research and did all of that in her life, and others who have said this is what it says. And it doesn't say anything about the pineal gland being, anything like people are saying, or the chrism going up your spine or anything. Some of the stuff that people are saying that these texts teach is not true. It doesn't say yoga is the way to find the Lord. You sit in a position the rest of your life with your knees crossed and go Om. It doesn't say any of that. Friends, we've been duped on so many levels. But I will say that, like, for instance, Joseph Smith said that in the beginning, the Elohim, plural, he said they didn't create the earth. That word means that they took existing things and organized them. Okay, what does that mean? Well, first of all, if you think that Joseph Smith was a prophet, as I do, I take a little bit of interest in that. But it doesn't tell me everything. It might give us a clue. And that, just what he said, could be some inference that there were some Elohim in some eternal realm that we all existed in. We've already believed that. And that they themselves may have made some kind of computer simulation, which is the world we're in now, for us to come down and learn. Maybe you could stretch it that far. But we don't know. Can you imagine? Well, remember the movie, I always mention this, Avatar, where they go to this other planet, but they're actually not going to the other planet. They're in a drawer with a Neuralink in their brain, and it's all fantasy. That's why the movie's like a cartoon. Well, what if we're really in the immortal world where we live forever, never die, and we're all up there, and there's university classes and stuff up there, and we signed up for a class, and this is planet Earth. It's a class, and we're all here in this classroom, and we're unconscious of that real world that we're actually in, and we're, somehow in a drawer with a Neuralink, and we're going through this classroom in a computer simulation, right? I mean, evidently it's something like that, although I don't know if it's actually a computer. Perhaps we're just beings that got in a delusion. I'd rather look at it that way. I think we're just in a delusion on our own minds and growing and advancing like animal life, advances up to get their white robes and become divine. But, I suppose that could be just another way of explaining what we just said. It's maybe just a classroom. We're in a simulation. But, I've always said I don't believe we're in a simulation. I think this is the real universe, and we're just all graduating. And as you expand your consciousness, of course, you may see more of the universe, But if it's the one thing we do know, though, is that the physical matter is an illusion. And if that's the case, then it's really, ultimately the earth could have many mysteries that we don't know at this time as we advance in knowledge. And I do think it's very likely that beyond our present understanding of land masses and so forth, there could be other worlds. It's possible, and we just don't know. But this map is fake, and we need to start calling out individuals that think they're experts on the flat earth and keep throwing these pictures up and never tell us that this is a fake map. I'm sorry, we have to do this, friend. We have to start drawing lines and saying, look, if we're going to figure anything out, I mean, the scientists aren't going to tell us. NASA's not going to tell. We know they're lying. The Bible says they would lie in the latter days. They would be a great deception. The devil has come down to you having great wrath to deceive the whole world. And this is what's happening. And so now another deception is getting started. And I'm sure there are some very sincere individuals who believe this and teach, but they're getting impetus from something. People like David Weiss, people that may be CIA agents, may be sort of creating some hype to get everybody off into another theory. Maybe it's good that we get off and start thinking the earth is flat. That way we don't accept everything that they tell us. But then we don't want to get into a place where we just don't know what to believe. And so therefore we make up this crazy, amazing fantasy and start believing it like a religion. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses did. They made up some fantasy that they're the governing body and they know what they're doing and the Lord told them and this is what it is. And if you don't believe them, you're going to die and go to an infinite oblivion. And only a couple of million Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be saved. And they're never going to have eternal life, right? Because the only one who's got life is the Father, and not even Jesus. Although they admit that Jesus was granted eternal life. How do you grant someone who has no life? How do I breathe life into a rock? If that's what Jesus was, if he was created, a created being, and he was nothing but, well, he was nothing. And then one day, the almighty being who is something and infinite, all by himself, floating around in space forever, just never speaking or thinking or imagining or creating, just for all infinite, what is a being that does nothing forever? I don't know. But one day, this being who is nothing and did nothing forever, one day in the middle of forever, he decides to make something, right? And then he somehow makes it alive, but not really alive, just temporarily alive. And then a million years goes by and he says, okay, boom, now you're alive. He grants him eternal life. Well, that doesn't make any sense. In one sense, it might be true, in the sense that there is a divine oneness that somehow, in theory, I don't know that it happened in time or space, but in theory, it's the source of all the other parts. And because the whole has life, each of its parts has life. But this is the thing that we've got to do. We've got to really know what we're talking about before we start talking. Now, I don't mind people saying, look, I got a theory or I had a dream or, okay, great. But this mass delusion where everybody's going along now and saying, we now know, we found a map or we've got proof the earth is flat. We know that. We don't know that. We absolutely don't know that. For all we know, the earth is some kind of a figure 8 spiral thing where you live and you die and unconsciousness and consciousness is leaving one area of the hologram into another, and it's like a wormhole. We don't know. And it may, in physics, in our minds, in our conscious mind, it may look like a round globe, but that globe is somehow the positive pole is somehow a wormhole that goes to the next planet and the next planet. To some extent, I think there's something like that going on, because certainly Polaris is where the Lord dwells, according to the ancient scriptures. And the earth seems to revolve around Polaris, at least from my perspective, as I look up in the sky. And if you really, most people don't know this, but you're really looking towards wherever the Lord's throne is. Now, the science today says if you're looking towards Polaris, you're looking in the opposite direction of the center of the galaxy. Well, I don't know if it's the exact opposite, but they say you're looking in a different direction, and sometimes they'll say away from. But think about it. If you're looking to Polaris, it's because it's nighttime. And from the beginning of dusk until dawn, Polaris is always right there in the northern sky. So it's there whether it's day or night. It's just that you can't see the stars in the daytime. And so looking into the sun wouldn't be towards the center of the galaxy. If Polaris is the opposite, then the sun is going to be going around east to west, and we're looking from north to the north. So you'd have to then say that you'd have to be in Australia and look up at the southern pole star. And if what they're saying is true, then we're looking towards the center of the galaxy. I mean, the exact direction of the center of the galaxy, according to science, is the constellation of Sagittarius. So, I mean, if the constellation of Sagittarius is in the southern sky, because that's down at the bottom of the wheel. You got to remember that the wheel has nothing to do with whether you're looking towards the sun or something, or Polaris. Because like I say, the Polaris is in the north. The sun, though, is going from east to west. So during the day, if you look out straight up, depending on what time of the day, I guess, you're looking either east or west. But Polaris is in the north, and Sagittarius is not in the south in the sense of the South Pole, but in the dark side, which isn't, which is east or west, see, depending on the rotation where you're at. Now, this is complicated to think about because we've got different things going on. East to west, the sun, and the Polaris in the north, and the rotations, and I get this. So don't worry if you don't fully grasp it. It's not really important. But if you understand that the Father's kingdom is in the north and it's also in the light, then and night and day is every 24 hours, you couldn't say that if the Father's throne is out there somewhere, it's in the direction of the daylight. But it is in the direction of the summer light. Okay, so the winter is Sagittarius because that's the bottom of the astrological wheel. But remember, that's not in the north or in the south, but it's going around the equator. It's not going around from south to north or from north to south, but it's going around the equator, and therefore it's kind of going from east to west. So Sagittarius is going to be in the winter, and the summer is going to be when the day or the astrological day is represented. So in the summertime, whether it's night or day, if you look up, you're not going to be seeing the same stars. It depends on if it's night or if it's day. So when you're looking at Polaris, you're looking at the heavens in the night. And obviously the sun has gone down, but now you're seeing the stars come around kind of east to west. And it depends on what time of the year then you're looking towards Polaris as to whether or not it's going to be pointing south. So the idea that the center of the galaxy is towards Sagittarius is true from the Earth, but you're not looking in the same direction if it's night or if it's day, see? So the whole thing is very convoluted, and there's probably no way that you could say, okay, Polaris is towards the center of the galaxy, but definitely probably towards the center of the universe. So when you're looking at Polaris, and they say it's because we're spinning on our axis, so it just appears to be always never moving, and we're spinning. However, there's something pulling us in that direction, and so it might be that wherever Polaris or whatever direction it is, which is not in the direction of the sun or away from the sun, because it's north, and the sun is east and west from us. But north has nothing to do with the bottom of the wheel or the top of the wheel. Except that those of us in the northern hemisphere, because the Earth is tilted on its axis and the sun doesn't go completely east to west, but sometimes the sun in the summer is going around more towards the north, and in the winter it's going more towards the south. So technically, if you looked north in the summertime, you're kind of looking a little bit more towards the sun. If you look at Polaris in the wintertime, you're looking kind of away from the sun, but not directly. So it's a little bit, I don't suppose there'd be any way you could say that the Polaris is always pointing towards the center of our galaxy, if there is such a thing, and there's many galaxies, but it might be directly pointing towards the center of the universe. if you understand what I'm saying. And I know that's very confusing, but it's just to say that we cannot look at Polaris, even though the Bible says, and all the esoteric wisdom says that the Chinese, every Egyptian, the Chinese called it the emperor's seat. The Egyptians called it Phoenix, which is just their word for Enoch. I know, Phoenix, is just the word for Enoch, or Enki in the Sumerians. So, Phoenix or Enoch is Jesus in our Bible, because the book of Enoch says that Enoch would be the Son of Man. He is Jesus in a prior incarnation. So that's the throne of Jesus, right? Next to it is Cephas, which is the Father's throne. So it seems to be indicating timetables of when the Father ruled, and then it was going to be handed over to the Son, because the Cephas star used to be the North Star, but is gradually going towards Polaris. Now Polaris is pretty close to being the North Star, but it won't reach its complete apex of being absolutely directly north until about 2100, I think. So that's about the time it's telling you, the timetable that Jesus will reign forever and ever, or at least for long ages. Polaris will be the center, and everything will be revolving around Jesus and his kingdom. Does that mean that Polaris is literally the star where Jesus lives? We don't know. Is it towards the center of the galaxy? We don't know. Is it just a parable? Maybe. So we might be looking at a particular star called Polaris, and that just might be representing the center of this galaxy. And who knows if it's an actual galaxy? We've never seen. The scientists say we're living in the Milky Way galaxy, which got 4 rivers or arms, and some partial arms that spin off of it. But how do they know that? There's no possible way that we, on this little speck of dirt, could perceive what they're claiming is 2,000 light years away and see the spiraling arms and all of these things. They're lying about all that. We don't even know if we're in a galaxy. But if we are in some kind of a swirling void, in the center of which, I think theoretically, right, philosophically, this is probably an example of what might be something like this, that the center is where the source is, the spiritual, the being. And therefore, when we're looking towards Polaris, we might be either literally or philosophically or some other way peering into the depths of the center of the universe, which may be where this divine mind is. And yes, that what I just said, while for me it makes a lot of sense, I don't have absolute proof that that's true, in the sense that we could detail all the details about it and know exactly anything about it. But we can say that the scriptures speak of these things, and there is something behind it. Because every ancient religion and priesthood and temple all goes back to this astrological knowledge that came from the Pyramid of Egypt, which was before the flood. And all we know about that is what's in the Bible. There was a flood, and then Plato talks about there was a flood and this kind of thing in Atlantis. But we're just putting very small bits and pieces of information together and trying to develop a patchwork of ideas that make some sense. Ultimately, we don't know anything other than we're here to live by faith. Because the Bible says we must live by faith and not by sight. And why, perchance? Perhaps it's because we're in a classroom. We're not going to be given a cheat sheet. We're not going to find out what the answer is. We have to be in a position where we think that maybe all is evil and all is bad and there's nothing and we're going to die. And as divine beings, go within ourselves and find the truth through faith. Because this is what's going to give us eternal life, is gnosis. And we have to overcome the doubts and all of the barriers to our understanding that we might grow in grace and in faith. And we have to learn the benefit of love and learn to overcome the instinctual fear that we had as an animal. So anyway, I don't know. I guess it's kind of a convoluted and complicated thing, and we just don't know everything. And that's the truth. But I'm going to let you go. It's almost an hour now, and get this loaded. Hope you have a wonderful evening, guys. Lord will be with you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.